Hi, I'm Bob Larsen. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show. I've coached in the United States for many years, including at UCLA. I was an Olympic assistant coach, coaching the distances in Athens in 2004. And I'm still assisting Meb Keflezighi, who's had great success in the marathon in recent years, winning Boston, New York, and also getting a medal in Athens in 2004.
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Listeners, welcome to another episode of the Physical Performance Show. I trust you've been having a great week and you've been pursuing your physical best. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode featuring none other than Rich Willey, prolific running researcher, physical therapist, and associate professor at Montana University. Rich and I spoke on episode 74 as an expert edition around all things running injury related: shoes, strength training, technique, and management of patellofemoral or kneecap pain. If you missed it and that is speaking to you, be sure to jump over and tune into episode 74. Thank you as always to you, the faithful folk who make this show possible, and also to those leaving reviews over on iTunes. Today's show, as always, is lovingly brought to you by POGO Physio. We exist to help you perform at your physical best through our industry-first, fixed price and unlimited access 2, 6 and 12-week finish line programs. It's real simple. We want everyone who walks through the doors of POGO to get across a physio finish line. That's the high five moment where we tell you that we love you, but you've rehabilitated, you're back to your physical best, and you don't need to come back, unless it's for maintenance or a new injury, of course. You can find all the details over on pogophysio.com.au, including the POGO Partners Program, bringing the finish line programs to a practice Australia-wide near you. We're going to try and jump straight into today's show with Coach Bob Larsen. Bob Larsen and I connected in the 2015 New York Marathon, where Bob was there with his evergreen athlete, Meb Keflezighi. Coach Bob's record is very impressive. Bob is a Hall of Fame track and field athletics coach, and Bob has coached his athletes in recent years from Mammoth Lakes, where he trains the squad at altitude. Bob's arguably most notable athlete is Meb Keflezighi, who Bob coached to a silver medal in the 2004 Athens Marathon, an accomplishment that ended a 20-year drought in the US distance running medals at an Olympic level. 28 years it had been since a US marathoner or distance runner took a medal in the marathon at the Olympic Games. Building on that success, Coach Bob coached Meb through to a New York Marathon win in the 2009 edition of the race, the first American athlete to accomplish that feat since Alberto Salazar did it 27 years before in 1982. Meb then went on to win that historic 2014 Boston Marathon. Previous to that, Coach Larsen coached the UCLA cross country and then track teams between 1979 and his retirement in 1999. It's an amazing career Bob's had. His career started in high school, went through to junior college, university, and open divisions. Coach Larsen's bio is incredible, and we're going to touch on that in today's interview. It's extensive. We talk about training tips, insights, Meb's career, and of course, City Slickers Can't Stay With Me, the film that documented Bob's coaching career, which I've seen, and listeners, I encourage you to take a look at if you're into physical performance and certainly if you're into running. So let's jump straight in with Coach Bob Larsen. Listeners, joining us today on this episode, we have a legendary coach, Bob Larsen, who hails out of the US. And Bob's credentials, as per the top of the show, are outstanding, having coached athletes to Olympic success, such as Meb, being coach at the Mammoth Track Club for numerous years, and really taking the US out of what was a 27 to 28 year drought of Olympic medal success at Olympic Games in the marathon. Bob Larsen has done it all. Least to mention, of course, the great movie City Slickers, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and had the pleasure of briefly meeting Bob at the 2015 New York Marathon when Bob was there with Meb. So Bob Larsen, all the way from Mammoth Lakes in beautiful California. Great to have you on the call.
Thanks, Brad. I have to correct you. You give me way too much credit for all of that. I had a small role in some of those things, but we're very proud of, Joe Vigil, who I suggested he join us a few years ago. It was back in 2000 when I was retiring from UCLA, and wanted to put together a training group similar to the Hamul Toads that we had in San Diego that won the national cross-country title back in the 70s, all part of that City Slickers Can't Stay With Me documentary you referred to. So that's kind of how this training group got started, and other people contributed a lot to make it a success. And when Joe and I started this project, it wasn't about just getting our athletes on a national team, but it was really about trying to bring American distance running back to an internationally competitive level. And as you pointed out, especially the 1990s in the United States, we'd really fallen behind. There were only a couple guys around that were really holding their own internationally, and Bob Kennedy and Todd Williams, I believe. But other than that, on the men's side at least, there wasn't anybody that really was doing much. So Joe and I had some wonderful athletes down back in that era, and we knew what it took. And I wanted to add altitude, and Joe was from altitude, so we selected Mammoth Lakes. And as you know, that was kind of the impetus to do something that we're all very proud of.
Yeah, and I've been, Bob, my wife and I accidentally stumbled across Mammoth Lakes en route to out of San Francisco to Las Vegas many years ago now. And, I had no idea at that stage, this was a decade plus ago, of what was happening in the world of endurance sports from Mammoth Lakes. But by gosh, I was taken by the beauty of the place. It was just spectacular, isn't it?
Spectacular is a good word for it. And at first it was a little bit difficult to convince some of the athletes that this was what they had to do. Even Meb, do we really have to go to altitude? Because you're still isolated. He wasn't married then, and to leave his friends and family in San Diego, and he'd only shortly graduated a couple years previous to that from UCLA. So yes, it's a beautiful place, but when your friends and family are someplace else, we were all making sacrifices, but it was so rewarding that I think all of us are very, very glad we did this.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the results speak for themselves. Bob, let's rewind the clock to, you've coached at high school level, junior college, university, open divisions, all with success. What's the genesis story of Bob Larsen, both one as a runner, because I know you've enjoyed your running throughout your years, and two as a coach?
Well, as a runner, I grew up on a farm in northern Minnesota, and log cabin, no running water, electricity. So anybody that grows up like that, we feel we're physically strong and in some ways better than City Slickers, and that's where the film City Slickers Can't Stay With Me came from, because when my folks moved to San Diego when I was a young teenager, then my high school physical education coach happened to be the track and field coach, Raleigh Holt. And he said, you got to come out for track, because I was beating everybody in the gym class. And of course I said, what's that? And he explained and said, they run a mile or shorter distances. And I was never outspoken, but I said to myself, well, city slickers can't beat me, and that's where the name of the film came from. And I did win the city championship in the mile and figured out a lot of things about distance running. We were pretty clueless, but in those days, so we were making it up as we went. We were beating all the other teams, but we were hardly doing anything in workouts, and we were getting injured. Raleigh Holt talked me into thinking about being a coach, and I ended up doing that and having a lot of fun with it and learning a lot on the way because I was injured quite a bit, because we used to always just race and workouts, and we'd just go all out practically every day, and we had no background. We weren't doing enough. We weren't doing hardly any road runs at all in high school, absolutely nothing. It was just interval training, 3 days, take a day off, and then race, and then not work out during the weekends. So, by the way, I wanted to say one thing about that documentary. Robert Lusitano did it, never done a documentary in his life. He was the runners at Monte Vista High School, Grossmont College, the Little Toads, and UCLA. So he knew all this stuff, and I tried to talk him out of it a couple times, but he started proceeding with it, and I found a lot of stuff in my den. He pressed me on those things. I have no financial interest in it, but it did play all over the United States, and it's in theaters, and now it's on Amazon and on iTunes. So I'm sure glad I didn't talk them out of it. People are getting a kick out of it, and they find inspiration in it. And obviously a big part of it, many aspects of how fortunate I've been to work with such wonderful athletes. But Meb and his family are prominently featured, especially when he wins Boston at the end of the documentary, and how he did it and what he was thinking during the race, and a little bit about what I was thinking while I was watching him win that race. And those are special moments, and I almost talked Robert Lusitano out of doing that. So
isn't that amazing? And Bob and listeners, will tag this up in the show notes so you can jump straight over and check out the movie. It's absolutely worth watching. And as you say, Bob, I found it to be inspirational. And one of the things that I found so refreshing, Bob, is the longevity that you've had with some of your athletes. Obviously, none more so than Meb, which I think is just so beautiful in today's often changing coach-athlete, world of relationships. And Bob, could you have imagined when, you were first introduced to the concept of coaching that your career would turn out as it has?
No, not at all. Even when Raleigh Holt was telling me I should be a coach, when I went to college, I wasn't really planning on that. In the back of my mind, I remembered his words, and as I got into running even more in college, then I liked the idea, and I just felt we were making so many mistakes, even though we were doing well. Chuck Sportsman was our coach, and he, like a lot of coaches in those days, was coaching many events, but he was a good distance coach too. But Europeans were running much faster than we were, and we were trying to figure out what they were doing that we weren't doing, and of course there's a whole bunch of things, and so that kind of piqued my curiosity. And I loved the science classes, kinesiology and physiology, and et cetera, because that also was a clue as to maybe how we could get better. And when I graduated in 4 years, and Chuck Sportsman turned the distance running team over to me, and right away we got some results. The guys liked some of the things I was initiating, and a little bit more distance, nothing compared to what we do now at all, but at least we got out on the roads a little bit. And then I love to run fast. I guess everybody does, but I love to run fast out where you could just open it up and go. And we probably did too much of that, but threshold training then became a big part of the program. And they invited me to stay there as a full-time coach at San Diego State, but I wanted to coach in high school because most of the best coaches I had all coached in high school that I saw that were at the college level. So that's why I opted to go to Monte Vista High School for 4 years, a little place that hadn't done anything. And so it was perfect for me because we could get those guys going right away. That very first year, they won a championship, and then went three years undefeated cross country, and almost won the county in track. So some wonderful things to the start of my career that helped me feel like, I was on the right track here, and stuff that Meb is doing to this day, we were doing back at Monte Vista High School in the early 1960s.
Wow.
Because some of that stuff is still good, and you add and you tweak, and each athlete is different. You try to find what works for that athlete, but many of the same things apply across the board.
What things, can you give us 2 or 3 examples, just myself and the listeners, Bob, of those things that were working back in the high school era, for Monte Vista to win 3 titles in a row, that you said, some of those principles have transcended time and they've still worked for Meb. I mean, Meb, 4 times Olympian, the eldest US team member on Olympic Games team at 41 for Rio last year. So can you give us an example, Bob, of 2 or 3 of those philosophies or key insights?
I'd be glad to. I have to correct one thing. With Monte Vista, I was there 4 years. That's kind of what I determined I wanted to do, 4 years of high school. They'd only won 1 cross-country meet, 1 track meet each year previous to me getting there. For the previous 2 years, and it was a new school, to be fair. So, but they clearly were not training hard enough and doing the right things. And the person who organized the track and cross country was a wonderful guy, a really good coach, but not a real knowledgeable in cross country and track and field. The reason I have to, if any of the Monte Vista kids hear this, they're going to tell you they won 4 championships, and they did. The last 3 years they went undefeated, and we were the smallest school of all the schools we were running against. In fact, we even went large school when we had an option, or they gave us an option, and we wanted to go against the large schools in the championship. So obviously I'm bragging a little bit, but at the same time setting the stage of why what they did was kind of a cornerstone of what I knew would really work, and gave me a lot of confidence that when I went on to other levels, that part of this that I was using at Monte Vista was going to give us success at each level. And a big part of that was threshold training. We were doing threshold or tempo runs, as we call it over here now, multiple times in a 7 to 10 day training period. And those in high school were generally 4 miles. And we go pretty hard because I'd run with him, and they didn't want the coach to beat him. So they had to stay up, and gradually 2 or 3 of them were better than I was. And you couldn't beat those guys. And they didn't look like much when they were freshmen, but by their sophomore year and on, they just got better and better and better. And a lot of the other teams were still more interval trained. And when we did more and more of that threshold training and less of the interval training, they just couldn't stay with us. And that was true at Grossmont College, where we won 7 state titles. That's the highest title you can win. And there are over 100 community colleges, and those coaches are really good. We went 1 through 5 on in an invitational where they're mostly universities 1 year. One of those schools ended up in the top 10 in the NC2A Division I cross-country championships. That was later in the year, obviously, and we were probably ready earlier than they were. But those are the guys, like at Grossmont College, that then ended up, some of those current runners were the Humboldt Toad team that won the national cross-country title in 1976. So, went on to Ed Mendoza, for instance, went to the Olympic Games in 10,000 meters. He also eventually ran 2:10 in the marathon. And so all of those things helped when I was at UCLA, and then when we had Meb especially, that these are things that had worked, and we had guys running 2:10 in the marathon back in the 1970s, and we didn't think anything of it, that it wasn't this big of a deal. And as it turned out, in 1990s, a 2:10 marathoner would have left everybody in the United States easily. We would have had at least 3, 4, 5 guys who weren't marathoners necessarily. One of them was, but the other guys were just doing it as training. And even between seasons, I wouldn't talk them into doing a marathon. They just want to do a marathon sometimes at the start of track. In January or February, I'd let him do a marathon. And at UCLA, Steve Ortiz in his junior year ran 2:13. Ron Cornell ran 2:15. He was a 3:57 miler. Steve Ortiz was a 5K, 10K guy. He didn't make the Olympic team. He came very close in both events. So that's kind of how it evolved, where when you had someone that's willing to train hard and is very dedicated and doing all the peripheral things, and also be willing to go to altitude. Obviously, I'm referring to Meb and others. Yep. During this latter stage, then we had an opportunity to use some of the pure things that we found that work so well way back in the 60s and 70s. And early 80s, when the United States really had some good distance runners.
Yeah, I mean, and so there's some examples there, Bob. You need the right attributes from the athlete, just in terms of their ability and desire to work hard, the right, obviously, structure to their sessions, including what you mentioned, the threshold, or now what you refer to as tempo runs. Bob, in terms of injury minimization, how important has that been to you and in your athletes in their success over the years, and what strategies have you found to be really effective in that regard?
You're going to get a kick out of this, because I've read your book, and you have so many really good ideas on trying to reduce injuries, and it's a wonderful book because it covers so many areas, and you present it in a way that people really can understand. And I think it is a key, obviously. If you have a very talented athlete like a Meb and many other athletes, Ed Mendoza, Terry Cotton, and Kirk Pfeffer and these guys, some of them are very durable, and it's pretty easy to get them to a really high level. Meb had more injuries that were lingering type injuries, not real serious except for that one back in 2008. But other than that, they weren't real serious, but it's hard for him to get rid of it. So we had to really be careful with him. And fortunately, because I'd worked with a lot of other athletes that had similar problems earlier, when Meb came along, we put him in the pool for as much as a month at a time at UCLA and after, and we trusted that because Meb would work out really hard in the pool, so he'd stay in shape, so he wasn't starting at ground zero when he got back on the track, and he could run very fast within about 3 weeks being back on the track. So that saved his career in many ways, and we did other cross training later on, bicycle and elliptigo. That's really been helpful. So, and even one of the reasons he's been able to stay healthy late in his career, he made some adjustments. He doesn't need coaching at this period of time. Where I enjoy being with him and helping out a little bit, and but he knows exactly what he needs better than anybody else. So we discuss it, but he's making those decisions, and the pattern is pretty much the same that we've been doing for a long time. But one of the adjustments he made, similar to some of the athletes I had in the past when they got a little bit older, was to go on rather than a 7-day rotation, do a 9-day or longer rotation. And so he's got 2 easier days in between his hard days rather than just 1 day. And in the last couple of years, his second session during the day, he'd do the run session in the morning and then get on elliptigo or bicycle in the afternoon, and so he'd save his body a little bit more until that last month or 5 weeks or something like that. Then he might put in a 4-mile run or something like that, versus those guys back then that were also running 2:10 marathons. Some of those guys could run 8 miles in the morning, 8 miles at night, pretty hard on the roads. We do a little bit of interval training, and they were so fit that regardless of the distance they were racing in, all the way to a marathon, they were very, very effective with that. But that wasn't Meb's forte. Meb was always a shorter. He never did that type of mileage. We were aware of that would probably produce injuries with him, and thankfully it's extended his career.
Yeah.
Another thing I think that's extended his career is being at altitude, because you don't have to run quite as fast to get equal work in. We're on soft surfaces a lot. It's getting away from the hustle and bustle of the city and not just running tasks all the time. So it's hard to train like that and to isolate, but he's been willing to do it. He's still very motivated. He's got his last marathon, his 26th marathon, coming up in New York on November 5th, and if everything goes well, he's going to run well back there.
Yeah, wow, what an outstanding career, and that'll be quite a moment, Bob, won't it? The 2017 New York Marathon, Meb's farewell. I mean, gosh, that'll be an emotional moment for I think for the nation, the nation, let alone yourself and Meb, right?
He's got a lot of friends, and but he's looking forward to, I think, to no more training for the marathon, and he'll make appearances and run some shorter distances, and maybe half marathons and stuff, either competitively or a lot of times, I think, back in the pack and announcing, how fast he's going to go so other guys can run with him if they want. He helped lead him to a qualifying time in some race somewhere. So he's in a great place in his life, and to run his 26th and last marathon in New York is pretty special, because New York, probably everywhere now, obviously Boston, but New York as well as any, and maybe the first, just really reacted to him when he challenged the best in the world way back in about 2001 or so. Went it with the leaders, and even down First Avenue after 16 miles, those guys are running low 4:30s, and the next year they come back and run under 4:25 for that, like 16th, 17th mile, and he's there flying with them and even takes the lead. So at first time he suffered for it in the park, and we had warned him about not going that hard that early, but it's canyonized and everybody's cheering for you on First Avenue, and it's exciting, and all those guys go as they come off the Queensboro Bridge, and he went with him. But he showed his heart, and the fans just loved that. And here's an American out there running with them, and then he broke through and won New York in 2009, first American in 27 years, I think. And of course, Boston, the first winner in 31 years, a year after the bombing. So, it's storybook stuff, and to be a part of that is just, I've been really blessed.
And I imagine some of your peers, through your demographic, were on the golf course, and you were getting to share some of these history write-in runs, right?
Oh yeah,
it's just sensational. Bob, what was the first thing that Meb said to you, or you said to Meb after the Boston win? As you said, it was a year after the bombings. It features, as you say, prominently in City Slickers. Listeners, be sure to check it out, and it's very moving when Meb's describing, what's going through his head, and you're having an input too. So, what was the first thing that you can recall you shared with Meb as once he crossed the line in Boston?
Well, first, I'm standing right in front of the finish line. Not right on the finish line, but they kept everybody away from the finish line because of security from the bombing the year before. So the security people protecting the finish line were very conscious of their job, and they were pushing everybody away. So I had a clean shot at grabbing Meb, but Jordanis, his wife, was right next to me. and I knew, the one guy was grabbing everybody. So I said, well, if I go to the right a little bit, Jordanis, I think, will get through. So I did. So she runs in that iconic view of him coming across the finish line and grabbing him and her and crying, and they're hugging, and it's just perfect. And then he runs along the crowd on both sides and yelling, and just an unbelievable moment. And because when you see the film again, and that he had to earn that. The two canyons got within 6 seconds of him with about 2 miles to go. They were coming up very, very fast, and everybody anticipated that they were going to go by him, but he really worked on his technique. It's in the film. It shows what he's doing, what he's thinking, and he held it together and made it across the finish line. So for him to earn it that way, and people seeing that at the finish line in the huge video screen, and knowing that it was close to not being able to do this. So all that's in there, and as he's thanking the people and slapping hands and moving around the edge of the crowd, I'm just sitting there soaking it in. And when he comes back by, 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, and he comes up and close to me, and I said, who won? Just joking with him a little bit. It's in the documentary also. So, because obviously everybody's going crazy, and so I kind of had to do just the opposite. Well, who won? And so later they. On the television, they're saying, well, Bob didn't see it and didn't know he had won. I really had, and of course I was right there. But then we hugged, and just like when he got the medal in Athens. Yep. Again, first American in 28 years. Frank Shorter was the last man, U.S. man, to get a medal, and I told him then, this will change your life. And when he won Boston, I repeated that and just said, you've taken it to another level, and this is really, really special. But more than anything, we got tears coming out of our eyes at that point. It's very emotional for both of us.
I mean, it's such a moment. And Bob, on the 2004 Athens Olympic medal, what was the lead up like for Meb going into that race? Did you, obviously you expected a great performance, but was that something that you were surprised with, or you both knew going into that Meb was podium potential for Athens?
Well, to follow up on what you were saying about how important it is to stay healthy, many times he would go to the starting line less than at his best because of an injury had slowed him down. This time, everything went perfectly, and I was the Olympic distance coach, fortunately. So the year before I went to Athens, checked out the course. I was there on like a 100-degree day, very humid. I ran at the same time the race was going to be downtown, right behind buses and everything, to get the worst of it and say, this is a course and a moment that we can do something, because if we can figure it out. There's so many aspects, difficult aspects to this. A lot of people are not going to be ready for this. And so rather than doing the 10,000-meter marathon double, he was our top 10,000-meter runner in the United States, too. And he was running very well then, and was probably in 27-minute shape during the Olympic trials that year. Didn't have to run that fast, ran 27:30 pretty much by himself. But we knew he had a shot at a medal there, too. But we decided, because it's the historic race in Athens, that this is the one that everybody's going to be paying attention to. And also because hopefully we can figure this thing out and maybe have an edge because of how difficult it is. So talked everybody into going to Crete 3 weeks early. We trained really hard over there after we were at Mammoth for 3 weeks. Now we're in Crete, and Dina Castor, of course, is with us, and others that we've trained with before. And everything was going perfectly. And maybe 4 days or so, 5 days, maybe it was further out than that, before the race, all of a sudden I was running. He was out in front of me with the other guys and couldn't see him. All of a sudden I stopped and just felt like he's going to get a medal. And I even thought it very possibly was going to be gold. I just felt that good about it. Even though he was going to go to the starting line the 38th fastest, we never really came up with plan B, because I just felt he was going to be there. He was going to be in great shape at the end, and he was just doing some workouts at just both at Mammoth and at Crete that had convinced me that he was as good as anybody that was going to go to that starting line. I mentioned just two people, Baldini, who won it, yep, and Turcotte, who was the world record holder. And I said, if Turcotte has a great day, don't pay any attention to him. Baldini's a good hot weather runner. He's run well in championships before. It came down to he and Baldini, and Meb, probably being inexperienced, let him go with 2 miles to go. He knew that Turcotte was behind him. American hadn't medaled, and as I said, in 28 years. He had the silver. He felt he shouldn't chance it. He thought maybe he'd have another shot at Baldini, but when he finished, he was still looking good and felt good. He ran around the stadium. Probably should have been decided on the track, but give credit to the Italian. He ran a great race, knew what he had, and used every ounce of it. And anyway, so that's the long answer that Meb and I both felt like, yeah, maybe we think he can do this thing, and he did.
And what a redemptive moment in US marathon history it proved to be. Bob, you mentioned there were some workouts, just to press you on that. Can you remember one or two of them that were just, can you give details to those workouts that you recall pointing towards a great performance?
When we were up at Mammoth, we're at 8,000 feet, 8,000 feet. We go down to 4,000 feet to get closer to sea level to vary it. So the respiration rate is more like at sea level, and some of our faster workouts, more intense workouts, we'll do at 4,000 feet. But we also go to 10,000 feet, and we run around the lakes. So he was doing some workouts at 10,000 feet, 2 mile repeat workouts that the times I can't remember all that well. They weren't anything that jumps out at you the time, but I knew what it meant because they're kind of hilly and you're at 10,000 feet elevation. And then we would do some really good workouts, really strong tempo runs going as much as 17 miles, where he was finishing up in the 440, under 450 mile pace, sometimes a little bit uphill for picking up the last 2-3 miles, where he was averaging even in the middle, probably in the 450. So to be able to sustain that and those were usually at least 7,000 feet elevation. So, and we picked areas that duplicated much. If you've been on that Athens course, it's about till 3,200 meters, you're 32,000. You are going uphill much of that time, and so we did a lot of those tempo runs on very similar looking terrain, except we're doing it at 7,000 feet, and a lot of it was on dirt that that you slip and it's ruts on it, etc. So when he got on that course, and he saw the course, he felt like it was relatively easy compared to what we were preparing him for. And Joe Vigil, more hands-on with Dean, had been with her for a long time, coaching, and us together. But that combination of Meb and Dina, I'm out on the course, and she, of course, had moved well over the last part of the course after she got up the hill, ran people down, and ended up giving it bronze. That was 20 years since an American woman had gotten a marathon medal since Joan Benoit. So that set it up too. That was at the beginning of the Olympic Games. So we knew what we were doing had to be working really well with what Dina had accomplished, and so had a plan for Meb, and he executed it perfectly. And he was the guy at the end. And so a lot of thought, a lot of planning went into that. And Meb makes great decisions in races, and he did that day.
Yeah. And the rest, as they say, Bob, is American running history, right? And Bob, in terms of coaching metrics, I mean, runners today, Bob, and coaches alike have so much access to data. It's every decade there's just more and more available. I recall running with my junior triathlon days, Bob, with my athletics coach, and we had heart rate monitoring, and that was a breakthrough. Fast forward to today, 2017, there's so much available at people's fingertips. As an esteemed coach, Bob, what do you think are the most important metrics that runners at a recreational level and then a professional level, can learn from and be guided by?
Well, it's a pretty broad question. I'd say for a top runner, rather than the recreational runner, but it would apply to anybody. But when you're doing your threshold runs, you should know approximately how fast you should be running. Now, it doesn't have to be real exacting. All the research that's been done shows that once you know what that threshold should be, what it should feel like, and you teach athletes to reach that threshold, then they can maintain it, and even without heart rate monitors or anything. And we have taken lactate tests up at Mammoth and down at sea level to make sure we were within that area that we felt that we were seeing the athletes run at. But it went back to, you stop taking the tests because every time they're the same, because that they know what it feels like and what they have to be doing. And thinking back, we had discovered that long time ago, back in the 1960s. If you maintained at that threshold, your body gained more from that, probably. Your body adapted to that more than almost anything else you did. And you could add a little bit of speed work to that, but it didn't take very much when you were really, really fit and strong. So whether you're a recreational runner or a top runner, I think getting that right. Now, we put people on a treadmill so we can break it down and figure out what their threshold pace can be. Meb could run in the 430s, low 440s, and still be within that mark of not going into lactic acid that he has to slow down. Part of it could be trial and error. We had access at the Olympic Training Center in San Diego area, Chula Vista, to be able to show exactly how fast he could run. It was reassuring because when I discovered that these guys could go out on the roads and run really fast all the way back when I was coaching in high school, and even that season coaching the guys at San Diego State, sometimes you're a little bit worried they're racing. It's not threshold, but it proved when you put them on a treadmill, you got to work pretty hard. And as long as you're not psyching up too much for those efforts, those threshold efforts, you could do these things repeatedly, and you could peak for the big races because you didn't have to incorporate so much interval training. It's harder to do with interval training because you tend to get there too soon. But you keep the threshold training going, add a little bit more interval training, back off on a little bit on the length of the threshold, but you never stop it all the way right up to the time you're going to be doing your championship racing. And so that's been one of the areas that I think was most important for our success. Yeah. Getting the number of miles you should run, and that's a little bit trial and error too, and it's not as much as you can tolerate, but how you're going to feel pretty good on a regular basis after you've put in a few weeks of this, that's important, very important, obviously, too. And then the concept of having planned rest, whether it be 2 days easy, 1 day easy, 2 days hard, 2 days easy, whatever it is that comes. But you have to have rest in there, because athletes left to their own, just going out and doing this stuff will run like we did when we were growing up, hard every day. And after about 3 days, it catches up with you, and then you're going to have some bad days. It's too long to recover. So you should probably never do more than 1 or 2 days in a row without a good easy day, and then get back on it again. And so those are some of the really important factors, I think.
That's brilliant, Bob. And with the planned rest, I mean, as a physiotherapist, it's a critical part of what we manage in my work, Bob, and certainly as a coach as well. I love what one of the previous guests shared, Bob. Nick Willis, obviously, miler, Kiwi, and Nick shared that he gets ahead when he's resting, not when he's training. And I just thought, isn't that a beautiful, mindset to have? Not an easy one to adopt as an athlete, though, right?
It is, and as a coach, even what I came to, because I early on I felt like physiology has the answer. Why give someone 10 repeat quarters, if they only have to do 8? But, gradually I realized that, science is not perfect, and we'll never be able to give that exact answer to it. We've got to be fairly flexible. But to try to stay with science as much as you possibly can with what they're telling us, it helped us with altitude. I have physiologists I call regularly, Robert Chapman, who is our physiologist for USA Track and Field, and others, Ben Levine. They put together the idea of high, low training, and they did a lot of tests on what your blood cell mass, increasing it when you went to altitude, and going to a lower level and then back up again. These are wonderful tests, and the results, and it helped perfect what we do. But at the end of the day, some guys are going to train harder in a certain area than someone else will. So you still got to find something that guys are willing to do. It maybe takes a long time. Some guys just hate mile repeats but love doing a lot of short intervals. Well, you can shorten the rest and do more of them. You come pretty close to what you would have done with the longer repeats if they're not going to run hard anyway. We're talking about young runners, professional runners. They're going to do anything that's going to make them better. But some of these things are very helpful when you look at the total athlete, I think, and deciding what that workout for that period of time is really going to be. The other thing is we were talking about prolonging a career.
Yep.
And in your book, you mentioned the stretching, the strengthening, and drills. If you look at Meb's 2 books, one is Run to Overcome, the other kind of the inspirational book about how all this came about. The other one was Meb for Dummies or something like, the Essential Meb. I should have it. I haven't talked about it recently, so I haven't got it exactly, but it's, I'll think of it in a minute here.
And I can see the cover too, Bob. I can't articulate the title either, but I can see the cover. So, yeah, we'll tag it up, Bob, in the show notes for listeners.
Okay. But that book is full of drills that Meb does all the time, and it's just not in the book that he put it in there to make it look good. He does these things, and he's been doing it forever. Yep. And I think he's done more drills than any other distance runner of all time. At UCLA, we had on just one of those teams, one of our great collegiate teams, possibly the best 2 teams ever back to back collegiately. We had 4 guys get Olympic gold medals in the sprints, hurdles, etc., off of the one team. And those guys are doing drills all the time because it's about mechanics with a sprinter. You got to have the strength and all the other things too, but the mechanics are extremely important. And I coached all the jumps in the field events and the pole vault, and that's mechanics. In distance running, so many distance runners will do the endurance part of it, but don't want to do the other stuff. They find it boring. They want to get out and put the miles in. Well, with Meb, you just mention something and he'll do it. And so all these drills that we added over the period of time, and he picked up on his own other places, same stuff we were having sprinters and jumpers doing. Even when I went to Europe way back in the 60s and 70s, picking up all the drills that the coaches were giving their athletes over there, and brought those back, and a lot of the bounding and skipping and stuff like that used with distance runners over the years to make them more efficient. And that's helped Meb to be able to still retain flexibility and also the dynamics of being able to run at age 42. I think this has had quite a bit to do with him still being competitive at this age.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's such a great example, Bob, of longevity and and aspiring to be your best over time. Not just in one season. Bob, in bringing our time in towards a close today, of all the learnings, of all the experiences you've had in your coaching career, if you could boil it down, Bob, to one singular bit of advice for people across the board to perform at their physical best, what would that one maxim or one bit of advice be from Coach Bob Larsen?
That's hard to pin it down, Brad, but for a distance runner, you have to have a lot of patience. And if you don't develop that, a lot of times young people, we just get them to slow down, not so much slow down in running, although a little bit of that too, but just slow down their life so they can put together good training over a long period of time and be consistent with it and enjoy the sport. If you get those things right, you can do a lot of things incorrectly, I think, and you're going to get better. It's just going to happen. And just don't tear yourself up. Long-term planning and be consistent and don't rush through this thing and enjoy it as you go.
Bob, you must be speaking directly to me, I think. let patience have its perfect work. I'll take that on for sure, Bob. And Bob, we like to finish with something a little bit fun and just to get to know our guests a little better. If you could have dinner with three people, Bob, living or past, who would be at your table and why, Bob?
Are we talking about anybody, or are we talking about athletes?
Anybody, Bob. Can be athletes. Often the athletes like to get politicians at their table. That's been a bit of a theme. Who would be at yours? Three people, living or past.
Well, Abraham Lincoln, and George Washington, and I think someone who has experienced great challenges in their life. Those would be the most interesting people to me. And we've had some people currently, but those old-time guys, that had those special moments in history, I think we'd all love to be a part of a conversation with them.
Yeah.
By the way, I just thought of Meb's second book was Meb for Mortals.
That's right.
I'd sure recommend it, again, with a lot of the stuff I'm talking about and some of the workouts, but especially the drills and stretching and things like that are in that book also.
Yeah, and absolutely. And we'll tag those up, Bob, for the listeners. Head over to the show notes. And lastly, Bob, the very last thing, we like to get the guest to issue a performance challenge for listeners, Bob. This can be very easy. It can be very difficult. Some people issue, pull-up challenges, go into the gym. Other people will talk about increasing your long run by 2Ks or going out and running for half an hour. What's Coach Bob Larsen's physical challenge for the week going to be?
Are you talking about everybody? I mean, I'm going to get myself in trouble here because I'm going to...
It can be
some
everybody.
Some old guy's going to get out there and have a heart attack.
No,
I'm old myself. I still run every day, but I'd be worried about misleading somebody here, Brad.
I understand. So taking all that into account, Bob, maybe give a more, midline challenge for the week.
Well, I think everybody should be doing something to increase their cardiovascular fitness every week. And even people who have mobility problems, there are ways of getting in a swimming pool, getting maybe on a bike, hopefully, or even a hand crank or something like that. I hope everybody that listens will try to retain their mobility as long as they possibly can in life, whatever that mobility level is. Our ages should really be not just our chronological age or our mature age. It should also incorporate our mobility. So my challenge to everybody would be try to keep your mobility as long as you possibly can, and that means getting out and trying to move as many days of the week as you possibly can.
Coach Bob Larsen, it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to catch some of your insights from your significant career, and you're still writing chapters. So on behalf of the listeners, Bob, I just want to say a big thank you. And listeners, if you're in the Mammoth Lakes area, look up Bob and say hi. And if we want to find out more about Coach Bob Larsen, where can we go online, Bob?
Well, there's the film. Well, if you Google my name, and it's Larsen, there's probably, I haven't done that, but my sister tells me there's a whole bunch of things listed there, probably some other interviews, and you can find the film City Slickers Can't Stay With Me there. By the way, there was a film several years ago called City Slickers. It was very popular, so people shouldn't get confused. The City Slickers Can't Stay With Me is a documentary recently made. Yeah. I have to apologize for my long answers, but you piqued my... it's fun to reminisce. I'm getting at that age, Brad, where I'm thinking back of all these wonderful things that have happened, and you pushed my buttons that way today. I wish you could edit all this stuff. Maybe you're going to just throw it out there. The poor people are going to have to sit through this, but hopefully some of this stuff will help them in some of the decisions they're making in their endurance activities.
Bob, I think you've shared some absolutely great insights, and I'd like to even catch up again, maybe post Meb's final marathon post New York. So thanks so much, Bob. You're a true gentleman.
Thank you, Brad. Enjoyed our conversation.
So, listeners, there you have it. Another episode of the Physical Performance Show. I hope you enjoyed Coach Larsen's sharings around his career and his athletics insights, which are many. Be sure to check out City Slickers Can't Stay With Me. We'll pop the link in the show notes, so jump over to pogophysio.com.au. If you know someone that enjoyed the episode, I'd appreciate it, and so would Coach Larsen if you'd be kind enough to share it around. Thanks also to the good folk who make this show possible week in, week out. Mr. Daryl Misson, audio engineer extraordinaire, and Susan Wilkin, adminaholics, extraordinary VA to the program. Thank you, guys. Coming up in next week's episode 76 of the Physical Performance Show, I catch up with surf life-saving Ironman Matt Bevilacqua. Matt is another of the Tasmania, that is for overseas listeners, talent factory that is sharing his knowledge and career highs and lows on the program. So be sure to tune in next week to the ever-popular Matt Bevilacqua here on the Physical Performance Show. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.